Dr. James Walker had spent most of his life chasing fragments of memory, old letters tucked into attic boxes, brittle photographs with names scribbled on the back, faded newspapers whose ink still told stories if you squinted just right. He believed that history wasn't just written in books, it lived in the voices of people, in the things they left behind. And for too long, the stories of his own community, the black men and women who had built, fought, worked, and dreamed in this town, had been pushed aside. So James made it his mission to bring them forward. For 20 years, he taught history at the local college, challenging his students to question the silences in their textbooks. In the evenings, he interviewed elders on their porches, recording their voices as they spoke of migration, hardship, and triumph. He dug through church archives, traced family trees, and rescued artifacts from being discarded. Every detail, every name mattered. All of it came together in his greatest project, a monument in the center of Memorial Park. The sculpture, designed with the help of a local artist, showed two hands, one bound by broken chains, the other lifted high toward the sky. Beneath it, an inscription read, "For those whose voices built this city, and for those who must never be forgotten." When the monument was unveiled, James stood back, watching as children pointed curiously, elders wiped their eyes, and families posed for photographs. To him, it wasn't just stone and bronze. It was proof that his community's history was not invisible, not erased. It stood in the very heart of the town, demanding recognition. As dusk fell that day, James brought his young son, Elijah, to the park. The boy craned his neck, staring up at the hands of the statue. "Daddy," he asked softly, "why did you build this?" James knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Because, son, there are people who will try to pretend our history never happened. But this makes sure they can't forget. This is our story carved into stone, and it will stand longer than any of us." Elijah nodded, his eyes shining. "Forever?" James smiled. "Forever." What James couldn't know then was that there were already those who wanted to silence that story, to tear down the monument before its roots could take hold. And soon, their voices would rise louder than he expected. It didn't take long for the monument to stir resistance. At first, it came in murmurs, half-heard comments at the farmer's market, muttered words outside church on Sunday. "It doesn't fit the look of the park. It's too political. Why couldn't they just put up a nice fountain instead?" But whispers soon found a leader. Her name was Karen Whitfield, a longtime resident with deep ties to the city council. Known for her sharp tongue and sharper smile, Karen had built her influence on neighborhood committees, charity galas, and relentless networking. To her, the monument was an eyesore, though the truth, James suspected, was that it represented a history she'd rather ignore. At a council meeting not even a month after the unveiling, Karen made her stand. "I appreciate the intention behind this sculpture," she began, her voice dripping with practiced civility. "But let's be honest, this piece does not reflect the harmony of our town. It's confrontational. It reopens old wounds that should be allowed to heal. And frankly, it diminishes the beauty of Memorial Park." Several heads nodded, though others shifted uncomfortably. James sat quietly in the back, his hands folded, listening. He had expected some criticism. History, after all, was never without conflict. But the cool dismissal in Karen's tone made his chest tighten. When the chair opened the floor for responses, James stood. His deep voice carried easily across the chamber. "This monument does not reopen wounds," he said calmly. "It acknowledges them. It honors the people whose labor and struggle built this town, people who have too often been left out of our story. If truth makes us uncomfortable, perhaps that says more about us than it does about the monument." The room grew hushed. A few people clapped softly. Others avoided his gaze. Karen smiled thinly. "With all due respect, Dr. Walker, art should bring communities together, not divide them. And right now, this monument is doing the opposite." Over the next weeks, complaints multiplied. Letters poured into the local paper. "The monument is depressing. It makes our park look like a protest site. It doesn't represent our town." One morning, James arrived at the park to find a crude sign taped to the base of the sculpture. Take it down. He pulled it off, heart heavy, but not surprised. That night at dinner, Elijah asked, "Daddy, why don't they like the monument?" James sighed, setting down his fork. "Because, son, sometimes people don't want to see the truth. They'd rather cover it up than face it." Elijah frowned. "But if they cover it up, it doesn't go away." James smiled faintly. "Exactly." And in that moment, he knew. This fight wasn't just about stone and bronze. It was about whether the truth had the right to stand in the sunlight, or whether it would be pushed back into the shadows once more. Within weeks, the monument had become the fault line of the entire town. On Saturday mornings, Memorial Park, once a quiet place for joggers and families, transformed into a battleground of signs and slogans. One group gathered with handmade posters that read, "History Matters" and "Protect the Monument." Across the lawn, another group held banners declaring, "Keep our park beautiful," and "No politics in public spaces." James often walked among them quietly, notebook in hand. He didn't shout or chant. Instead, he observed, recording as he always had, the words of his community. But what he saw unsettled him. Neighbors who had shared block parties now refused to speak. Old friends crossed the street to avoid one another, and children overheard arguments they couldn't yet understand. The local newspaper ran story after story. One headline read, "Freedom Monument Sparks Division, Symbol of History or Source of Discord." On talk radio, callers argued heatedly. Some praised James for giving the town a landmark that honored forgotten voices. Others accused him of stirring the pot and forcing guilt on future generations. At a town hall meeting, the division played out in full view. "This monument is pride," said Mrs. Alvarez, a teacher who had marched during the civil rights movement. "It tells our children that history is not just about statues of generals, but about the people who lived, struggled, and survived right here." A man across the aisle shot back, "It's a constant reminder of negativity. My kids shouldn't have to walk past chains on their way to play baseball. This isn't healing. It's rubbing salt in old wounds." Voices rose, hands waved, tempers flared. The mayor tried to gavel for order, but the room had already fractured into shouting. That night, James sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of old journals and photographs. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This monument was more than his project. It had become a mirror, reflecting the town's deepest tensions. Maya, his colleague from the college, called him. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked softly. James sighed. "I knew history was never neutral, but I didn't think they'd try to erase it this quickly." "Then you can't back down," Maya replied. "If they succeed in tearing this down, what's next? Every book that makes them uncomfortable? Every truth that doesn't flatter?" James stared at the photo of his son taped to the edge of his desk. Elijah's smile was wide and hopeful, the way only a child's could be. And James knew. This wasn't just about protecting stone and bronze. It was about protecting memory itself. The town was split, and the fight was only escalating. And James was beginning to understand. He would soon have to defend the monument, not only in public squares, but in a courtroom. Because Karen and her allies weren't finished. They were just getting started. The morning James arrived at Memorial Park to find the monument draped in heavy gray canvas, his chest tightened as though someone had covered his own lungs. A stark wooden sign stood at its base. "Closed pending review by order of the City Council." For James, it was like watching someone throw a shroud over memory itself. The hands that had reached skyward from broken chains were now suffocated beneath fabric, hidden away as though shameful. Karen, of course, was triumphant. She paraded through town with a copy of the council's resolution tucked into her binder, telling anyone who would listen that common sense had prevailed. On the local news, she smiled sweetly as she explained, "We're not trying to erase history. We're simply ensuring our park remains a place for unity, not division." But her words rang hollow against the images that soon flooded the community. Within hours, people gathered at the covered monument. Children knelt to lay flowers at the wooden sign. Elders lit candles at dusk, their flames flickering against the canvas as though demanding to burn it away. High school students taped handwritten notes to the shroud. This is our story. Don't silence us. Each act of remembrance turned the shrouded monument into something larger. What Karen intended as an erasure became a rallying point. James stood quietly at the edge of the crowd one evening, his son Elijah beside him. The boy's small hand gripped his tightly. "Daddy," Elijah whispered, "why did they cover it up?" James swallowed hard. "Because some people don't want to see what it means." Elijah's eyes filled with confusion. "But if it's covered, does it still matter?" James knelt down, looking into his son's earnest face. "It matters even more now, because every person here came not for what they can see, but for what they refuse to let be forgotten." The pressure intensified. Karen and her allies pushed formal petitions to have the monument removed entirely, citing community complaints and park harmony. Meanwhile, supporters launched counter-petitions, organized marches, and filled council inboxes with thousands of emails. The park became a constant backdrop for protest signs, television cameras, and tense standoffs between the two sides. What had once been a quiet corner of the city was now the center of a storm. And James, though weary, felt a fire building inside him. He realized this was no longer just about a single monument. It was about who got to decide which history was honored and which was buried. So when the council announced that the case would be brought before the court, James didn't hesitate. He would testify. He would stand in front of the judge. He would make sure the voices carved into stone would not be silenced by paper and politics. And as he prepared his notes late one night, James whispered to himself, "They wanted this covered. Now we'll uncover everything." The courthouse was packed the morning the case opened. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing as townspeople streamed inside, some clutching signs that read, "Protect our history," others holding placards demanding, "Take it down." The building itself, with its marble columns and echoing halls, seemed almost too small to contain the weight of what was about to unfold. Inside, Dr. James Walker sat at the plaintiff's table, a neat stack of notes before him. He wore a simple dark suit, but his presence filled the room. Across from him sat Karen and her supporters, their lawyers flipping through binders thick with paperwork. Karen herself sat with perfect posture, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, lips pressed into a confident smile, as if she were certain victory was already hers. The proceedings began with the city's attorney, who represented Karen's side. He spoke in measured tones. "Your Honor, this monument, while well-intentioned, has become a source of division and unrest. The purpose of Memorial Park is to bring peace and beauty to our community. This sculpture, with its imagery of chains and suffering, disrupts that harmony. It is our position that its removal is in the best interest of the town." He gestured toward a petition, pages upon pages of signatures stacked high. As you can see, a significant portion of residents agree. This is not erasure. It is restoration of balance. Karen nodded solemnly, satisfied. Then it was James's turn. He stood slowly, adjusting his glasses, and walked to the center of the courtroom. His voice was calm but carried through every corner of the chamber. "Your Honor, members of the court, this monument is not about division. It is about truth. It is about the men and women who lived, worked, and built this town, but whose names were too often left out of plaques and history books." He paused, letting his words settle. "This monument shows broken chains not to shame, but to honor. It is not meant to reopen wounds, but to show healing, that freedom was fought for, earned, and passed down to us. To hide this monument is to say their struggle never happened. And that, Your Honor, is the true division." A hush filled the courtroom. A few people in the gallery wiped their eyes. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as though caught in the gravity of James's words. Karen's attorney tried to push back. "This is sentiment, not law. What matters is the will of the community." James turned toward him, steady and unwavering. "And what of the community that has been silenced for generations? Do their voices not count? This monument is their voice, and it deserves protection." The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "Enough for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow for further testimony. As James sat down, Elijah, who had been watching from the benches, leaned forward and whispered, "You were amazing, Daddy." James smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on Karen. Her confident smile had faltered just slightly, but enough to show cracks in her certainty. The battle had only begun, but for the first time, James felt the tide shifting. The second day of the trial felt heavier than the first. The courthouse steps were once again crowded, but the energy was different, tense, expectant, as though the whole town was holding its breath. Inside, the benches were full. Some carried folded newspapers, others clutched their children's hands. The monument had become more than stone. It had become a test of what the town believed itself to be. Karen's side came armed with charts, petitions, and long speeches about unity and aesthetic harmony. Their lawyer's voice echoed sharply as he argued, "Your Honor, this monument does not heal. It divides. It forces residents to relive pain they had no part in, and it creates hostility where there was once peace. We ask again for its removal, for the sake of order and community." Karen's nod of approval followed each word. She glanced at James with the same cold, clipped smile, as if she were already savoring victory. Then James rose for his final testimony. He walked slowly to the witness stand, not with anger, but with gravity. His voice was steady, deep, carrying not only his own story, but the voices of those who could not stand there themselves. "Your Honor," he began, "when people say this monument divides us, what they really mean is that it reminds us. It reminds us of truths some would rather forget. But history is not meant to make us comfortable. It is meant to make us honest." He paused, glancing at the crowd. "If we take this monument down, we tell our children that only certain stories are worth remembering. We tell them that voices of struggle, of resilience, of freedom, hard-won, can be erased with the stroke of a pen. But if we protect it, we tell them the truth. And the truth," he said firmly, "will outlast us all." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's pen had stilled above his notes. After hours of deliberation, the judge returned. The gavel struck once, and the room fell into complete stillness. "This court finds that the monument in question holds significant cultural and historical value," he said, his voice measured but resonant. "Its removal would not serve the interests of this community, nor of justice. Therefore, the monument is to remain standing in Memorial Park. And further, it shall be placed under legal protection as a cultural landmark, ensuring its preservation for future generations." For a heartbeat, silence lingered. Then, the room erupted. Cheers, applause, the sound of people rising to their feet. Some wept openly, others shouted, "Yes!" and "Justice!" James sat still, his hands clasped, tears shining in his eyes. He glanced back at Elijah, who was standing on his chair, clapping with all his strength. Karen's face had drained of color. Her lips pressed into a hard line, but her power had evaporated. She gathered her papers in silence, ignoring the cameras flashing around her. James exhaled deeply. He had fought for truth, and truth had been given protection, not just for today, but for tomorrow. And in that moment, he knew. The chains on the monument were broken forever. 2 days after the verdict, Memorial Park was alive again. The heavy gray canvas that had smothered the monument for weeks was gone, pulled away by city workers under the eyes of hundreds of townspeople. As the cloth fell to the ground, the bronze hands were revealed once more, one breaking free of chains, the other lifted toward the sky, catching the afternoon sunlight. The crowd erupted in applause. Children ran forward to place flowers at the base. Elders touched the stone as if greeting an old friend. Families snapped photos, their faces glowing with pride. The monument, once shrouded in controversy, now stood taller than ever, protected by law, embraced by the people. James stood near the front with Elijah at his side. The boy's small hand slipped into his father's, his eyes wide as he gazed up at the gleaming figure. "They can't cover it again, right, Daddy?" Elijah asked. James knelt, meeting his son's gaze. "No, son. The court made sure of it. This monument belongs to everyone now. It will stay here, not just for us, but for your children, and their children too. Elijah smiled, his chest swelling with pride. So, they'll always know the story? James's voice softened. Always. That's the power of truth. It outlives lies, and it outlasts those who try to bury it. As the sun dipped low, candles began to appear at the base of the monument. The soft glow spread across the crowd, illuminating faces young and old. A choir began to sing, their voices rising in harmony, carrying through the park and beyond. Reporters jotted notes, cameras clicked, but James didn't focus on them. He watched the people, neighbors who had once argued now, standing side by side, united not by erasing history, but by remembering it together. And though Karen lingered at the park's edge, arms folded, she was no longer the center of attention. The crowd had no time for her scowls. Their eyes and hearts belonged to the monument, and to the story it carried. James placed a hand on the bronze base, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips. He whispered a promise, not only to the past, but to the future. You will never be forgotten. The monument gleamed under the evening sky, no longer a target of debate, but a beacon, a permanent symbol of resilience, truth, and the unbreakable power of memory. And for the first time in weeks, James allowed himself a full, unguarded smile. The fight was over. The story would stand. Forever.